Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. Come with me once again to the time of Tales of High Adventure as I continue my series talking about Robert E. Howard's Conan, Adventures in an Age Undreamed of, the most recent entry in the long saga of Conan the Barbarian-based RPGs. This week, I'm going to talk about the core mechanics. They were a little more complicated than I had thought, so it took me a little bit to wrap my head around all of them, so I do apologize for there not being a video in this series last week. So, continuing with the series, I will now be talking about how the system works at its core level. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Every system has its core mechanics. Robert E. Howard's Conan has two sets of mechanics. One for combat, and one for everything else. So we're going to start with talking about the one for everything else. This is a skill test based system, and you roll 2d20 minimum. There are ways to get extra dice. We'll get to that in a moment. But your goal is to roll under the target number. The target number is determined by the attribute plus the expertise in the relevant skill. And additionally, you get bonuses if it is a skill you have a focus in, and you end up rolling below your focus value. So let's say you're trying to jump a chasm, and you have the athletic skill, and you have a high strength, and you have a focus in jumping. Or we'll go better. Let's say you have focus in long jumping. Of 3. Your strength, in this case, we'll say is 10, and your skill is 8. So you have to roll an 18 or more. Sorry, 18 or less. 18 or less on this. And I should point out this is a really kind of exaggerated high-end test here. Alright. And I said you have a focus of 4 in long jumping. So, you roll on your 2 die, you roll an 8 and a 3. Your 8 is 1 success. Because you rolled under your focus, you're now getting 2 successes. So that gives you a total 3 successes. If the GM set the difficulty at 3, that's what you're rolling at. And you succeeded. If the difficulty was set at 4, well, you've got problems because you needed 4 successes. However, let's continuing on here. Let's say you're in a situation where you roll your dice and you roll a 20. Well, a 20 is not necessarily a failure, because if somehow you have a combination of your attribute and the relevant skill where the total is 20, you've still technically succeeded. It's a hypothetical and not likely to show up in play, but it's a possibility. But what happens when you roll a 20 is a complication happens. If one of your die is a 20, it's a minor complication. If both, things get a little bit weirder. I mean, this complication can be anything from your sword breaks to you roll a complication on your perception test, and so some guy shoots your girlfriend with a snake arrow. That's a complication too. It doesn't have to be something that directly affects you. It's something that affects the world around you in such a way as to make things more interesting. Because you kind of got on fate's bad side. And there are some tests that are what they call difficulty 0, simple tests, where you're just rolling to see how well you succeed. You just need even one success and you've got it. Which is different from a difficulty 1, where you pretty much have to get that. Well, simply put, a difficulty 0 is you've already kind of succeeded, but you're rolling to see how well you did. While a difficulty 1 is you have to actually get a success. Kind of thing. A difficulty 0 is opening a slightly stuck door. A difficulty 1 is overcoming a simple lock. And there are various modifiers to the difficulty based on either you're doing multiple actions, like, you're hanging upside down trying to pick a lock. Acrobatics and lockpicking. Maybe you're trying to pick that lock in really bad lighting. Or, you're trying to pick or trying to solve a combination lock that's in a different language that you don't understand. All of those things can upgrade or increase the difficulty. Some things might be able to lower the difficulty. But those aren't always the case. Now, there's one type of test. Other systems call it a contested roll. Robert E. Howard's Conan calls them struggles. These are where you and another character are competing, and so you roll off to see who generates the most successes. Well, except it's not entirely successes you're generating. You see, whenever you succeed on something, every success beyond what you need to succeed is added to this pool of points called momentum. Momentum can be used for a lot of things. And, in some cases, it's used to add dice. It can be used on any given skill test once. It can give you bonuses in combat and all sorts of, like I said, things like that. And when you are in a struggle, you're not trying to see who picks the lock best, so to speak. You're seeing who's generating the most momentum. And so, if two people are picking the same lock, and you need one that only needs one success, and another has difficulties popping up that they need 2 successes, and they each roll 2 successes each time, they're still getting 2 successes. They're still doing what they need to pick the lock. But the one who only needs 1 success, because of various factors he set up, or maybe the obstacles he's put in the way of the other person, he's going to win quicker, or win in general, in the struggle. Now, of course, you can voluntarily fail a test. If you voluntarily fail a test, you gain certain benefits. When you choose to voluntarily fail a test, you're doing things a little bit differently. See, you voluntarily give the GM 1 point of doom. And in exchange, you gain a fortune point. Fortune points are, of course, something big and powerful. They let you change fortune. And I'll talk about those in a little bit. Another situation that pops up is success at a cost. And first off, if you have a success with a cost, you do not gain any momentum. You gain the most basic level of success. The purpose of success with a cost, though, is that sometimes a failed skill test causes things to grind to a halt. So, the GM will give the player the option, and most will most likely accept this, to accept a most basic level of success in exchange for up to 3 complications. And this means the character succeeded on the task. So let's say, let's go back to our jumping the chasm. The player jumps the chasm. They leap over the chasm, grapple onto the ledge, and scramble up. But maybe they've sprained their ankle with the jump. Maybe the jump causes something that makes them easier to track. Like, oh yeah, while they're scrambling, they cut their leg. Not enough to do any actual damage, but the bleeding helps give anyone that can get over there fast enough an extra benefit to tracking the person. Anything like that. Of course, there's other options out there in many things. One of these is that you have ways of improving your odds. Improving your odds basically means you're getting extra dice. Now, you can take various methods to improve your odds. These are all based on the principle that proper planning prevents poor performance. And so, these are not things you're going to generally do sort of on the spot, usually. And each of these adds a die 20. You cannot gain more than 3 die 20s onto any roll. Methods you can take are creating opportunity. And this is a thing you spend momentum for. And it's basically you get a single bonus die, and you've done it by giving yourself an opportunistic thing. Like, again, let's go back to that chasm. Jumping the chasm. you're going to, instead of going, I'm going to jump at the chasm, you go, there's this springy tree branch. I'm going to run on that and let the spring add to my jump. It's crazy, but yeah, that's a justification you could use. And that's created an opportunity. You can also, of course, add to the doom. Doom is one of those mechanics for the GM that basically lets him do bad things to you. You can, of course, use fortune. And it's each time from time to time you're going to turn in fortune to aid yourself. And when you spend one, you can add a bonus die to a roll. But here's the thing. If you decide you're going to spend fortune, you must spend your fortune before the dice are rolled. And of course, you can choose to expend resources. Like, okay, let's go back to our jumping the chasm, because this is a great heroic opportunity moment. Alright, you know you have to jump the chasm. You see that there's a tree on the other side. So you're going to use a grappling hook. Try and throw it across, loop it around the tree, and swing across. It's still an athletics and jumping test. Now, though, it's more about jumping in such a way you don't hurt yourself when you hit the wall. Because you're now using your strength on that rope as you jump across. It's probably still not a good idea, but hey, it's still cinematic and heroic. And of course, now we come talking about momentum. Momentum is essentially, it's the whole, as things continue, you just start building momentum. It's meant to represent the pulpy action, because as you start doing more cool things, it starts being easier for them. Remember, you can spend momentum to add dice to your rolls, thus giving you the possibility of generating even more momentum, so that you can keep doing more and more stuff. And that's one of the big things. Things you can spend momentum on are, of course, creating opportunities, creating obstacles, i.e., increasing the difficulty for other people, obtaining information, improving the quality of a success, increasing the scope of a success, or reducing the time required to do something. So, if you're picking a lock, you can spend momentum to pick the lock faster. I.e., I'm picking the lock, the water's rising, I gotta pick the lock. And you get a good enough roll that you're able to reduce the time that you're able to pick the lock, open the door just before the water level goes over your head. Nice heroic moment. But, of course, not everything is always that simple. And let me take a moment to talk about a special thing called fortune. Every player begins the session with a pool of 3 fortune points, usually. Sometimes they can start with fewer. And you cannot exceed 5 fortune points. So that means you voluntarily fail on something, you get that fortune point. You can really only do that twice unless you spend fortune over the course of a session. And things that you can use fortune for are, you can add a bonus d20 to a skill test. You can perform an additional standard action. You can overcome a weakness. Overcome a single type of something called harm, physical, mental, or etc., until the end of the current scene. You can give yourself a second wind, catch your breath, and restore 1 stress, vigor, or resolve, i.e. your hit points, physical or mental, to full by spending a single fortune point. Or you can do something to influence the story, i.e. you can spend a fortune point to introduce a fact or add a detail to the current scene. And by doing that, you have changed the story. And that's talking about fortune. Now, let's go ahead and talk about action scenes, i.e. combat. As I said, action scenes are pretty much the form of combat. Now, they're not necessarily combat. You can have a dramatic chase that's an action scene. Basically, what determines what counts as an action scene is more how close and fast everything is. Like, you're a hero running from the enemy. You've already gotten out of the castle and maybe into the woods a bit before the alarm goes off. That's going to be a normal scene for the chase. However, you're running from the palace guards down the corridors of the palace. They're right on your heels, and anything can happen to stop you or give you an advantage. That's going to be an action scene. Not just the fighting the wizard on the stone bridge in the erupting volcano. Well, that's also an action scene, but action scenes are more about the immediacy of the action, the threat. Or at least the people chasing each other. And what's going to happen is each action scene is divided into a number of rounds. When each character acts, that is their turn. Generally speaking, the PCs, as the heroes, go first. However, at the start of a round, before anyone has acted, or at any time immediately after a player character has finished acting, and before another player character has begun to act, the Game Master can spend 1 point of doom to interrupt the player character's turns and allow an NPC to act. In other words, look, things are bad. I'm making them worse. I'm spending the point of doom to get something to act before you. Note there's an important sidebar in here on indecision. This is on page 108 of the core book. If the players spend too much time deliberating and discussing their choice during an action scene rather than taking action, the Game Master can add 1 point of doom to the doom pool as a warning that the player characters are ceding the initiative to their opponents. If the player's deliberation continues, the Game Master can take additional doom points, warning the players periodically until they act, or until the Game Master chooses to spend the doom, allowing any NPC characters to act first. In other words, it actually has a mechanic to make you keep the players acting. Because, and this is an important thing, Conan is not a game about let's think things through and choose the best course of action. No, it is meant to give a feel of pulp adventure. And so, you need to think. Maybe. But you definitely need to act. To seize the moment. And hit that guy in the face with your axe. Of course, there's all sorts of more complicated rules. The reach of weapons and such, distance communication, movement. But let's be honest, what everyone really wants to know is, how does the combat system work? Well, first, something to remember is, during each character's turn, they can perform a single standard action, a single minor action, and any number of free actions. Now, what constitutes the different kinds of actions? Free actions are making a small change to your position, not actually moving. Well, you can move to any point within close range, including into or out of reach. You can drop an item, you can drop prone, you can perform some sort of simple task, and you can speak. Now, unlike other games where you can deliver an elaborate speech as a free action, you can talk to allies, bellow a war cry, shout an order, threaten a rival, or use a few sentences or phrases. It cannot be used to attempt a command or persuade test, or to perform any other skill test that involves speech. Those need a separate skill test, which should be a standard action. Minor actions are including clear and unwanted status effect, drawing an item like your sword, moving to a point within medium range, taking a step back and bringing your guard up. If you're prone, you can stand up as a minor action. Then, of course, standard actions are things like assisting an ally, attacking, bracing, which is especially necessary for weapons that are called unwieldy, like pikes and spears. You can do what's called exploiting, where you take a little time to size up your opponent and prep for an attack to hit their vulnerabilities. You can choose to pass your action. It's still uses your standard action, though. So if you pass, you don't get to act again. However, you can also choose to ready, which is ready in action. Basically, you're going, when a certain circumstance pops up, then I will do my action. You can recover, which is you choose a single type of damage, physical or mental, and attempt an average skill test using resistance or discipline, depending on whether it's mental or physical. And you regain 2 points of vigor or resolve on a successful skill test. You can do a skill test. You can sprint, which is travel up to long range. You can attempt medical treatment, i.e. bandaging, on a ally. Or you can try to get out of an enemy's reach. And those are all the rough examples of what you can do with your different actions. When you make an attack, this is where things get different. There are basically 3 different types of attack: melee, ranged, and threaten. We're not going to talk about sorcery at this time. And you pick which type of attack and nominate what you can within range. If the target is aware of the attack, they can use the defend reaction. The defend reaction basically puts you into a struggle against them. Then you make a skill test determined by the type of attack. It's an average D1 skill test unless the target has declared the defend reaction, in which case it then becomes a struggle. And the attacker wins the struggle, then the target is hit. If the target wins, the attack misses. If the attack hits, the attack inflicts damage as described on damage and recovery. And this is where we get into why you have a special die. The combat die. The combat die is kind of different. So it is basically a 1d6. A 1 6-sided die. A roll of 1 has a value of 1. A roll of 2 has a value of 2. Rolls of 3 and 4 are 0. Rolls of 5 and 6 are 1. And a special effect. The special effect can vary, and we're not really going to get into that. What happens, though, is each weapon has a set number of combat dice it rolls. You can spend momentum, including momentum earned from your attack roll, to add extra combat die. And of course, if you've spent momentum in the exploit action earlier, that momentum adds to both your die on the initial attack roll and on your die to the damage die. So once you've calculated up all your damage die, and note that if you have the appropriate attribute at 9 or higher, you get extra combat die. You roll them all up, and then you total up the actual total of them. So, let's say you have 5 combat die. You roll a 2, a 1, 2 3s, and a 6. Well, that's going to give you a total of 2 for the 2, 1 for the 1, and 1 for special effect for the 6. So a total of 4 damage and a special effect. If you were going against the mental side of them, it would be stress. If you're going against the physical, it's harm. And under some circumstances, an attack may inflict an alternate harm. Alternate harm does not count towards the number of harms that a character may suffer. I mean, that alternate harm does not impose the normal difficulty increase. Because when you take a harm, it's basically you've been injured to a point where it's restricting your movement. Like, you've been hamstrung or something like that. And yes, this system does use hit locations. You roll a 1d20. 1 to 2 is the head. 9 to 14 is the torso. And there is, of course, some ways of mitigating damage. How much damage you do with a particular attack is determined, and then the target totals up any soak that they might have. Soak comes either from the type of damage, whether it's persistent or consistent, whether it's persistent or conditional, and then you reduce the damage by that soak. If this would reduce the damage to 0, then the attack is over and the target remains unharmed. And yeah, that is pretty much combat in a nutshell. I'm going to end this video now because it's definitely getting a bit long. Next week, or next video in this series, I will be talking about character creation and advancement. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.